Hi, Jennifer Nicely here with Pinnacle Real Estate Academy. Today I wanted to talk to you about the due diligence period that we as realtors have an option to use. We have an option to use our repair request addendum that is in our purchase and sales agreement, or we can override that and use a due diligence addendum. Now, I have found that a lot of realtors don't know what the due diligence addendum is for and how it works. So I wanted to bring you this video to explain that. Now, there are other states like North Carolina that only have a due diligence addendum, and they do not have the repair request timeframes that we have the option to use. Here, because we have both options, a lot of people just go with what's in our standard contract. So let me take a few minutes to explain to you the difference between the repair request and the due diligence. Now, behind me on the board, I have two different types of monies. I have the earnest money and I have the due diligence money. Now, the earnest money still holds the same purpose that it always did. So let's hypothetically say we've got a $100,000 sales price. We're purchasing a home for $100,000. And a lot of people say, how much earnest money do you put down for that? Well, the question you ask the buyer is, how bad do you want the home? There's not a certain percentage that says 1% of that or 2% of that. It really is, how bad do you want the home? Because that money tells the seller how strong of a buyer that you are, how motivated you are. So you're putting down that money in good faith that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. So, of course, the more money, the better for the seller. So earnest money always is going to be the same purpose. So if you breach the contract, then that buyer loses their earnest money. If they go through with the contract, then the buyer gets that earnest money back. Okay? Now, due diligence money. What is due diligence money? Due diligence money is money you put down that is basically a fee that gives the buyer the right to do any due diligence they want before a certain date. So when you've got the due diligence period, you've got one date to deal with, and that depends on what you put in the contract. But let's hypothetically say that our one date is June 15th, okay? So our due diligence period is June 15th. Now, before June 15th, I'm going to order all of the inspections for the buyer. We are going to deal with our loan. We're going to order septic inspections, pest inspections. We're going to do everything, all of our research for that home. Now, if before June 15th that buyer discovers something about the home that they don't like, it really doesn't matter what the reason is. It could be the paint color of the house. If they've decided that they don't want to buy that home, as long as it is before June 15th, then they're going to get their earnest money back. If it's after June 15th, then they are going to lose both due diligence and earnest money. So if the buyer wants to get out, it has to happen before this date. If the buyer decides to go through with the property and they end up closing, then the buyer gets the earnest money back and the due diligence money back, credited to them at closing. Now here's the kicker, and this is what a lot of buyers and buyer's agents have a hard time understanding why it would work this way. The earnest money is written to an escrow agent. So this could be an attorney, it could be your listing firm, it could be your buyer's agent's firm, but it's got to go into a trust account. That's normal. Whether you do due diligence or not, that always remains the same. The kicker is the due diligence money. So when a buyer writes a check for $500, they actually write it directly to the seller, and the seller deposits it in the seller's checking account. And if they're getting a loan, the lender wants to see that that check has actually cleared. Now, that's where the struggle is for some people mentally, because they say, why am I writing a check directly to the seller? Am I ever going to get that money back? Well, yes, you do when you close. It actually gets charged to the seller at closing, and it gets credited to the buyer at closing. So they get that money back. The purpose of this fee is basically a get out free card. Okay, so it's very good for the buyer because they can get out for any reason prior to this date. It's also good for the seller because now the seller knows once we're past this date, they can feel a little bit more comfortable about moving forward and packing up their homes. Agents in North Carolina tell their sellers don't pack one thing in that house until that due diligence date has passed. Well, I think that's smart. I think that makes a lot of sense. But here, when you have the due diligence period and the buyers want to go through with it, it's now June 15th. On June 16th, the seller feels good about the loan is ready to close. If you didn't do this due diligence period in Earnest Money here in South Carolina, and you did the regular repair request, then all the way up to the day of closing, sellers are still stressing about the buyer possibly backing out. Now, that could deal with inspections, it could deal with appraisal, it could deal with anything. But if that buyer were to back out, the seller has at least gotten something out of it, which is what that due diligence fee is for. So my opinion is I love the due diligence addendum. I absolutely love it because number one, it protects the buyer. It helps the buyer do all of their research and can get out for any reason at all. Now, of course, they're going to lose that fee, but that's a part of doing real estate, right? On the other hand, sellers, I love it for sellers because we're going to hold our breath all the way to June 15th and maybe stress about the buyer backing out. But after June 15th, we can now breathe a little bit easier. Or else they're going to get both earnest money and due diligence. So I hope that makes sense to you. If you have any questions, comment below. Let me know. I will be looking out for your questions.